the long road. The day had started out perfectly. 4 college friends, Ben, Sarah, Tom, and Jessica, had decided to embark on a road trip to celebrate their graduation. They'd rented an old, beat-up van, loaded it with snacks, camping gear, and music, and set off for what was supposed to be an adventure. Their destination was a remote campground nestled deep in the woods, about 8 hours from their university town. It was meant to be a break from everything, one last hurrah before they went their separate ways. The first leg of the journey was filled with excitement and laughter. They sang along to their favorite songs, told stories, and joked about how they were going to rough it out in the wilderness. The weather was perfect: blue skies, warm sun, and a gentle breeze through the open windows. They had planned to reach the campground before dark, but as they drove further from civilization, the road stretched out longer than they had anticipated. Soon they found themselves surrounded by nothing but dense forests on both sides of the road, with no signs of towns, gas stations, or even other cars. As the sun began to set, they realized they had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. Their GPS had lost signal hours ago, and the paper map they brought was outdated and confusing. Sarah, who was sitting in the passenger seat, squinted at the map under the van's dim interior light. "Are you sure we're even on this map?" Ben asked from the driver's seat, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm not sure of anything at this point," Sarah replied, folding the map and tossing it onto the dashboard. "There should have been a turnoff a few miles back, but I didn't see anything." Tom leaned forward from the back seat, staring out at the road ahead. "Maybe we should just find a spot to pull over and camp for the night. We can figure it out in the morning." "Camp here?" Jessica asked, glancing nervously at the dense forest outside. "We don't even know where we are." "Better than driving in circles all night," Tom said. Reluctantly, Ben agreed. They'd been driving for hours, and exhaustion was setting in. There hadn't been a car or a house in miles, and the fading daylight made it harder to navigate the increasingly narrow and winding road. They decided to pull off to the side of the road, where there was a small clearing that led into the trees. They stepped out of the van into the cool evening air. The sun had completely set now, leaving the sky a deep purple as the first stars appeared. The forest around them was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. It wasn't the campground they had hoped for, but it would have to do for the night. They unpacked their gear and set up a makeshift campsite next to the van, building a small fire to ward off the cold and the creeping sense of isolation. As they sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and talking about their memories from college, the tension from the drive began to melt away. But the feeling of unease lingered, and none of them could shake the sense that they were being watched. "Doesn't this place seem off to anyone else?" Jessica asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group. Tom chuckled. "It's just the woods. Of course it feels creepy at night." Ben nodded in agreement, but Sarah remained quiet, staring out into the darkness just beyond the fire's light. A sudden crackling noise came from the trees, and everyone froze. Ben stood up quickly, shining his flashlight toward the direction of the sound. "Probably just an animal," he said, though his voice was unconvincing. The rustling continued, growing louder as if something or someone was moving through the underbrush. The firelight flickered as a gust of wind blew through the clearing, making the shadows dance ominously. "I don't like this," Jessica whispered, moving closer to Tom. Ben, gripping his flashlight tightly, stepped closer to the tree line. "Who's there?" he called out. There was no answer. The rustling stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the clearing. After a moment, he turned back to the group, forcing a smile. "See? It's nothing. Probably just a raccoon." Before anyone could respond, there was a loud crash, like something heavy falling deep within the woods. This time the sound was too loud to be an animal. It was followed by a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down everyone's spine. "Okay, that wasn't nothing," Sarah said, standing up and looking around nervously. "Let's get in the van," Tom suggested, already moving toward it. They quickly gathered their things and piled back into the van, slamming the doors shut and locking them. Ben turned the key in the ignition, but the van sputtered and refused to start. He tried again. Nothing. "You've got to be kidding me," Ben muttered, pounding the steering wheel. The growling sound came again, closer this time. They could hear movement in the trees, something large crashing through the underbrush, but they couldn't see what it was. The headlights illuminated only the road ahead, leaving the dense forest behind them shrouded in darkness. "What the hell is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Ben replied, trying the ignition again. The van sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. "Yes," he exclaimed, slamming the van into reverse. As they backed out of the clearing, they caught a glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. Something large, dark, and fast darted between the trees, too quick to make out any details but unmistakably humanoid in shape. Go, Tom shouted, gripping the edge of his seat. Ben hit the gas, and the van lurched forward, speeding down the narrow road. The growling faded behind them, but the sense of dread lingered, thick and suffocating. They drove for what felt like hours, the road twisting and turning through the forest, with no end in sight. The further they went, the more the trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The headlights barely cut through the dense fog that had started to roll in, and the road seemed to narrow with each passing mile. "We need to find a way out of here," Sarah said, her voice tense. "This isn't right." "I'm trying," Ben snapped, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The road ahead seemed endless, a winding black ribbon that disappeared into the fog. Suddenly, the van hit something hard. The impact jolted everyone in their seats, and the van screeched to a stop. Ben cursed under his breath and jumped out to see what they had hit. The others stayed inside, peering through the windows, their nerves on edge. A few moments later, Ben returned, his face pale. "We hit ... something, but it's gone now. There's blood on the front bumper, but no sign of anything." "What do you mean, gone?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "I mean, it's not there anymore," Ben replied, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't know what it was, but we need to keep moving." As they continued down the road, the fog grew thicker, wrapping around the van like a living thing. The sense of being watched returned, stronger than before. Every now and then, they would catch glimpses of movement in the fog shadows darting between the trees, eyes glowing in the darkness. The growling sound, distant at first, began to grow louder once more. "What the hell is going on?" Tom shouted, panic rising in his voice. "I don't know," Ben yelled back, frantically trying to restart the van. The growling was now right outside the van. Jessica screamed, pointing toward the window. Something was moving in the fog, circling the van, its shadowy form barely visible. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural ways. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the darkness, and its growls turned into a low, rumbling laugh. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat. Before anyone could react, the creature slammed against the side of the van, rocking it violently. Jessica screamed again, clutching Tom's arm as the thing outside began to circle the van, dragging its clawed hands along the metal, leaving deep scratches. Ben continued to frantically turn the key, but the van wouldn't start. The creature slammed against the door again, harder this time, denting the metal. "Come on," Ben shouted, pounding the dashboard in frustration. The van roared to life just as the creature began to claw at the windows, its yellow eyes fixed on them with malevolent intent. Ben floored the gas pedal and the van shot forward, tires screeching on the asphalt. The creature chased them for a few moments, its long limbs propelling it unnaturally fast, but it eventually disappeared into the fog, its growls fading into the distance. They drove in silence for a long time, none of them daring to speak. The road finally began to widen and the trees thinned out as they neared the edge of the forest.